Hello, hello. How is everyone today? Sorry for the quick turnaround on the stream. I know this gives people very little time on to get ready. Um, but things are rather fast paced for me this morning. Just getting things done. Turn around on a second here. The so this morning I wanted to start off talking about um, surprise stream. It's not. I know it's like these streams. They happen around this time all the time. But at the same time, I usually give people at least another half an hour to uh, get ready and quickly. What are your thoughts on the White Walkers returning in House of the Dragon season 2 spy photos? It was quite a shock when I saw that headline. I don't know what to think or how they're going to pull that into the story. So it's very odd. I mean, maybe you'd have Jace discover something really incredible, and it doesn't matter because he's just going to die. But it's good to give people some excitement or something more pressing about the importance of the prophecy. But that's the thing is you could all of a sudden like Jace knows everything and he just needs to tell everyone and then you can just kill him off, or something like that. Before Anyway, before we get into things, I wanted to talk about Theon. Oh, this is too bright here. It's a bright hot day in Taipei today. I wanted to talk about Theon for a little bit, and the reason I think Theon is so interesting and the Ironborn are so interesting is that when I first joined the fandom, everyone was talking about R plus L equals J, and one of the big things to say, well, why is R plus L equals J so important, was to talk about the Great Northern Conspiracy and how everyone in the North is just going to turn around all of a sudden and start following Jon Snow, and that's going to pull in, everything. It's going to bring all the plot points together. Rob's will is going to get pulled in, and Lyanna's Mormont's letter is so important, and all of these sorts of things. And it tells this story about, the Grand Northern Conspiracy is this idea that somehow everyone is secretly rooting for Jon. And however, if you actually read the chapters that are about the North, you actually have a very different story. And so I'm going to go into this really quick. But if you remember, the North kind of, once Rob leaves at the end of A Game of Thrones, the North takes on a new plot, and that is essentially the Ironborn invasion. So Balon Greyjoy has this idea of taking the North, and he essentially goes through it as so. He sends Vic to Deepwood Mott to close up the bottle. This is kind of the most important. This is essentially the most important part of it. And then he sends Asha up here to Deepwood Mott. And then he sends Theon to the Stony Shore. And this is essentially his big 3-part plan. Now, Victarion's plan is the Victarion part is the only one that really matters. The idea is that they're causing trouble up here in the North, and Rob can't get back because Victarion has Deepwood Mott. And so Theon, though, mixes things up. He says, well, wait a minute. I have this cool idea, which turns out to be a disaster for him. And so he sends his boy Dagmar, who Dagmar Cleftjaw thinks of Theon as a son, loves the boy, loves him. And he sends him to take Torrance Square. Well, to fake take Torrance Square. It's a feint. And then while the Winterfell forces are out to try to rescue Torrance Square, he takes Winterfell. Boom. And then somehow, completely unexplained in the text, Dagmar actually succeeds in taking Torrance Square. We don't know how. We don't know how it happens. Maybe the forces like turned around and then took the Torrance Square, like everybody else, to try to retake Winterfell. But whatever the case, Dagmar takes Torrance Square. Now, the Clash of Kings plot then occurs. Theon is the forces from that went to go take Torrance Square, led by Roderick, turn around. They gather the remainder of the northern forces and surround Winterfell and threaten to kill Theon. And then out of nowhere, the Bolton forces come and we've got Ramsay hidden as Reek and all these sorts of things. And Theon gets captured. The northern forces get destroyed. Theon gets pulled to Winterfell. However, unbeknownst to all of us, there is a secret character who is left behind in a tree, which doesn't really make sense because the direwolves don't smell him at all. But maybe their noses were too filled with ash and fire and whatever. But nonetheless, Wex is left at Winterfell. Now, so this is our situation at the end of the Clash of Kings. Theon gets pulled off to the Dreadfort. Asha, she goes back and forth to the Iron Islands. Dagmar at Torrance Square. Victarion at Deepwood Mont. Now, and I always think this is really funny. Now, say you're Wex. Say you're a little boy of 12. Okay? You've been traveling for weeks, you've been traveling with Dagmar, Cleftjaw, and Theon's people. Theon's taken off. Now, if you were this 12-year-old boy, and you've just survived that huge battle, according to the A Dance with Dragons, he just for some reason decides to follow Osha and Rickon to see that they go to Skagos, and then somehow ends up at White Harbor, which makes no sense because you're Wex. Obviously, you'd probably go to Dagmar, if not Asha. Like, you'd go to Dagmar. Like, that's just kind of ridiculous. And we don't really know if he really followed up. But whatever the case is, we know he ends up at White Harbor. And then, so, here's our situation. Now, Asha has taken the Glover hostages, Glover's family and children, and sent them back to the Iron Isles. And we know in the Wayward Bride chapter that she pretty much comes up with this idea that she needs to redo the Kingsmoot after the failure of the Kingsmoot. And if there's a significant person that did not attend, you can redo the Kingsmoot. And of course, the significant person that did not attend the Kingsmoot is obviously Theon, the eldest son of Balon Greyjoy. I mean, it goes without saying. So she needs Theon to redo the Kingsmoot. And then we've got Dagmar Cleftjaw, who loves Theon as a son. And then we have Wex, who is Theon's squire. And we know that squires tend to love the people that are underneath them. So these characters, all want Theon back for various reasons. But Dagmar and Wex, probably what happened is that Wex went to Dagmar, and Dagmar somehow sent Wex to White Harbor. Wex didn't need to follow Osha all the way to Skagos, considering he was in that weirwood. He could have heard Osha talk to Lewin, and then figure out that they were going there anyway. So nonetheless, Wex is here, and he's helping Robert Glover and the Manderleys for some reason. What's his motivation for helping them? What is it? Well, it's never established or talked about, but of course his motivation should be Theon. And so at this point, eventually Theon is taken. Theon's Dance with Dragons journey. He goes down. Victarion leaves, obviously. Victarion, he deals with this. He heads up to Barrington, and then he ends up back at Winterfell. Okay, and then Asha is captured by Stannis, and she's sent on the Long March, but not before she leaves behind Christopher Bodley. So Triss is also added as hostages. Hostages that conceivably Lady Glover could trade for her own children. But for some reason, she gives them up. She gives them up to Tycho Nestoris. Weirdly, considering it's established in the Wayward Bride chapter that the only thing the woman thinks about is the only thing that she thinks about is her children. So she must be thinking something. She must be thinking that there's something advantageous to giving up Triss. And Triss and company are brought to Asha. Theon, escapes and is brought here. And, we've got this situation here. Now, all this together, though, you can kind of see a web of stuff that could be going on. Wex could have talked to Dagmar, who said, look, we're with you and we'll fight and help you if you get us Theon back. Wex says, okay, this is the deal. Dagmar Cleftjaw's forces will help you if we get Theon back. They go, fine, we'll get Theon back, but we need to get Rickon back, and we need to have the whole thing in Winterfell. And then, this is somehow communicated to Lady Glover, who releases her hostages and who releases Christopher Bodley and things like this. But the center to all of this is Theon, because Asha wants Theon, Dagmar wants Theon, Wex wants Theon. And amazingly, and I'm bringing back to when I first joined the fandom and started reading stuff, there were 1 million people that were like, well, Theon's story has essentially come to the end. We can just accept that he's going to get sacrificed to the werewood to feed Bran so that Bran can resurrect Jon or something. Crazy stuff like this, Theon's story is done. He's just going to die. When Stannis says he's going to execute him at the end of the Theon sample chapter, he's totally going to get executed. Because that's how Ice and Fire works. Characters announce their plans and then they happen, that's always what happens in Ice and Fire, But really, people were really talking about how oh no, Theon's totally going to get killed, and then Jon is going to, somehow everybody's secretly conspiring to put Jon on the throne. That all of these conspiracies going on in the north, because we have the Manderley Umber connection, because Manderley and Umber were building ships together, and then we have a Robert Glover here, and so we kind of talking to Manderley, and Manderley we know is really secretly against the Boltons, and so you kind of get this idea that okay, well, at least the Umbers and the Manderleys and the Glovers seem to be on board together, but this idea that it's all because they secretly got a hold of Robb's will, is kind of ridiculous versus Theon. They need to get Theon back because Wex and Dagmar is going to play a role. Now, Theon is also important because Theon knows the ins and outs of the Dreadfort. He knows the back doors to get in. There's an entire plot in his mind about the fake escape and stuff like that. So if you're someone like Stannis or anybody else conquering the North, essentially, you get Theon, you get the Glover hostages. So let's get rid of all this and talk about conquest of the North. Okay. So if you're, let's get a good want to get a good little thing to pop on here. This one all right? Ugh. No, it's got the little checkerboards. That sucks. Come on, what's going on here? No. Let's get a good one. Status Ice on Fire Wiki. Come on, you got it. They got it. They got something here. This one? Yeah, there we go. All right. So say you're Stannis and you're interested in conquering the North. Okay, so first of all, Theon knows the Dreadfort. So you can conquer the Dreadfort with Theon, with Theon's knowledge. Okay? So what two? If you get Theon, you get Torrhen's Square. Because Dagmar Cleftjaw is totally into Theon. If you get Theon, you get back the Glover hostages because Asha wants Theon. And so you get the Glovers. Okay. Now, if you get Rickon at the same time, which is what Davos is doing, you get Manderley, you know, and you get Umber. Right. So and you get Umber. So at this point, like Theon is so important that he secures you essentially the entire North. Now there's incidences of like Barrington and the Rills and stuff like that, and you know, I suppose you could capture, if you captured the people that are at Winterfell, you know, that would bring them in too, because you'd have the lords. But nonetheless, I mean, there's a few outliers, people that didn't show up, like the Flints of Widow's Watch and things like this, Flints of the Fingers. There's of course like Howland Reed and stuff like that. But for the most part, though, you've secured everything. And so I never, even reading like a really great analysis of the North, like Cantu's, he doesn't really talk about the Ironborn too much. Certainly none of these Grand Northern conspiracies talk about the Ironborn, because everybody's obsessed with Robb's will in these things. But, you know, really it is about Theon. The whole thing is about Theon. And the North story is told through Theon's eyes or Asha's eyes. So I never understood why, like, people never really put in the real connection that Dagmar, and when they talk about like Stannis taking Winterfell, they never talk about Dagmar being right frickin' there. He's right frickin' there. Like, what's Dagmar gonna do? He's right frickin' there. Dagmar's got to do something, you know. Anyway, that's why the Ironborn are so important to the North. I hope that was a fun use of the map here.